One might have hoped that the grotesque spectacle of American democracy's final degradation would at least have the decency to arrive with some subtlety, perhaps wearing the borrowed robes of principle or draped in the tattered flag of populism. Instead, what we witnessed in January of this year was plutocracy in its most naked and shameless form, $250 million raised for an inauguration, with tech billionaires and corporate titans quite literally seated on the dais alongside the incoming president, grinning like Renaissance merchants who'd finally secured their patron. If you're looking for the death of the American Republic, you needn't search the history books for Roman parallels. Simply observe the world's richest man, recently ejected from government service after a spectacular falling out with his benefactor, having spent months wielding unprecedented power over federal agencies, while his companies held billions in government contracts. Picture, if you will, a food bank in Detroit on a Wednesday afternoon. A line of people, working people mind you, not the work-shy or the indolent, but Americans with jobs who simply cannot afford to feed their children on what they earn, snaking around the block in the cold. A mother of three, a hospital orderly who wipes the backsides of the elderly for $12 an hour, waits for 2 hours to receive a box of dented cans and day-old bread. Her kids are home doing homework or trying to, though it's hard to concentrate when you're hungry. She makes too much to qualify for food stamps, but too little to actually eat. Meanwhile, the men who own the hospital chain that employs her, men whose names you'd recognize from the society pages, have just completed their acquisition of another network of facilities, a deal worth billions, financed partly by cutting her benefits package. That same week, those men donated $1 million each to the inaugural fund. This is not a metaphor, this is Tuesday in America. Or consider the diabetic in Ohio who's rationing his insulin, taking half his prescribed dose because he cannot afford the full amount after his insurance company denied his claim for the third consecutive month. His pharmacist knows what he's doing, his doctor knows what he's doing, everyone knows what he's doing. They also know what will happen, the slow deterioration of his kidneys, the numbness in his extremities, the infections that won't heal, and eventually, if he's particularly unlucky, the cardiac event or stroke that will kill him decades before his time. The cost of manufacturing his insulin is roughly $5 per vial. He's being charged $300. The pharmaceutical executives who set that price just received bonuses in the tens of millions for maximizing shareholder value. One of them now sits in a position to influence health policy for the entire nation, appointed there by a president whose inauguration he helped fund. The diabetic will be dead within 5 years. The executive will be richer. These are not anomalies. They are features of a system that has been deliberately constructed to extract wealth from the many and concentrate it in the hands of the very few. And now those few have decided that mere economic domination is insufficient. They want political power too. They want to write the laws that govern their own conduct. They want to appoint the regulators who are meant to restrain them. They want, in short, to rule. The 2025 inauguration was merely the most visible manifestation of this arrangement. Amazon, Meta, Google, Goldman Sachs, Pfizer, cryptocurrency ventures, all queued up to deposit their millions, purchasing not just access, but outright influence. Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, men who had previously maintained at least a veneer of political neutrality, bent the knee with million-dollar donations each. One doesn't require a degree from the London School of Economics to decode this transaction. It was protection money, pure and simple, paid by men who understand that in a thoroughly corrupted system, abstention is indistinguishable from opposition. Then came the cabinet appointments, a rogues gallery of such shamelessness that even the robber barons of the Gilded Age might have paused to consider appearances. 5 billionaires, count them, 5, were tapped for key positions. The world's richest man was installed, albeit temporarily, as head of a government efficiency operation. The Treasury, Commerce, Education departments, all handed over to men whose net worth exceeds the GDP of small nations. The combined wealth of this administration's leadership is more than 40 times the total worth of the previous administration's entire cabinet. The defenders of this kleptocratic arrangement trot out their tired apologetics. We need successful businessmen, they say. We need people who understand how the real world works. But the real world looks like this. A woman in rural Kentucky sits in her kitchen calculating whether she can afford both her blood pressure medication and her electric bill this month. She cannot afford both. She chooses the electricity because winter is coming and her grandchildren live with her. In 3 months, she will have a stroke. A man in Arizona loses his job when the factory closes, moved to Mexico where labor is cheaper. He's 56 years old, which means he's too young for Medicare and too old to be easily employable. He will die of a treatable infection because he delayed seeing a doctor, knowing he couldn't pay the bill. His death will not make the news, neither will the hundreds of others just like it that will occur this year. Meanwhile, the billionaires who decided to close that factory, who set the price of that medication, who lobbied for the laws that made healthcare unaffordable, these men are being asked to advise on policy. We're meant to believe that people who have spent their lives in the hermetically sealed world of private jets and Mar-a-Lago galas possess some mystical understanding of the struggles of ordinary Americans. It's rather like suggesting that because I've read extensively about the Mariana Trench, I'm qualified to survive at its depths. Let us be precise about what we're witnessing, for it deserves to be named clearly. This is oligarchy, the rule of the wealthy few, operating with such brazenness that it no longer bothers to disguise its mechanisms. The Citizens United decision of 2010 unleashed this torrent. 100 billionaire families now spend billions on elections, 163 times more than they did 25 years ago. This is not hyperbole, it's arithmetic. The Founding Fathers understood this danger with crystalline clarity. They had watched the corruption of the British system, where bought seats in Parliament and aristocratic privilege had rendered the will of the people a pleasant fiction. The entire American experiment was predicated on the idea that concentrated wealth posed an existential threat to Republican government. The revolutionaries who created this nation would view our current arrangement with the same revulsion they reserved for King George's court. We now confront the dystopian fulfillment of their worst fears. A child born today has only a 50-50 chance of earning more than their parents, compared to 90% for those born in 1940. The American dream has been revealed as a confidence trick. Studies show that 60% of billionaire wealth now derives not from innovation, but from inheritance, monopoly power, and political connections. The polite term is unmerited wealth. The accurate term is theft. And what theft it is. While the hospital orderly waits in line for food, while the diabetic rations his insulin, while the grandmother chooses between medication and heating, the billionaires grow richer by the day. During the pandemic, while Americans queued at food banks and watched their relatives die on ventilators, the ultra-wealthy increased their fortunes by 70%. Picture that for a moment, bodies piling up in refrigerated trucks, while fortunes expanded by margins that would have been unimaginable to 19th century industrialists. The richest man in the world doubled his wealth during a global catastrophe. He then used a portion of that wealth to purchase political influence on a scale that would have scandalized Boss Tweed. The apologists will invoke the First Amendment as if the ability to flood elections with unlimited cash represents some high constitutional principle. This is bullshit of the most refined variety. Corporations are not persons. They possess no lungs with which to speak, no conscience to consult, no mortality to concentrate the mind. And money is not speech. The equation is Orwellian in its inversions. Money purchases speech, certainly, and it purchases silence, which is the opposite of speech. Where is the Senate that might check these accumulations of private tyranny? It has become a rubber stamp for billionaire appointments. Where are the courts? They're busily expanding the Citizens United rationale. Where is the press? Many are owned by the very billionaires they should be investigating. But let me return to that food bank in Detroit because it haunts me in ways that statistics cannot. That hospital orderly waiting in line, she's not lazy, she's not stupid, she's not a victim of poor choices. She works 40 hours a week in a job that society allegedly values, caring for the sick and elderly. She does everything right according to the mythology we're sold about America, and yet she cannot feed her children without charity. Food is abundant, the nation is wealthy, but the wealth she helps create flows upward to men who donate millions to inaugural committees, while she waits in line for donated cans of soup. This is not the natural order of things. This is not inevitable. This is a choice that has been made repeatedly by people with power to structure the economy in ways that benefit themselves at the expense of everyone else. And now they've moved beyond mere economic extraction. They're installing themselves in government, writing the rules that govern their own conduct, ensuring that no future reform will threaten their position. The question that should haunt any person of conscience is whether this is reversible. The structural advantages enjoyed by the wealthy are now so deeply entrenched that reform seems almost fantastical. They control the politicians through campaign donations. They control the courts through decades of judge selection. They control the media through ownership. They have achieved regulatory capture of the entire political economy. And yet we must try, because the alternative is to accept that the American experiment has failed, that we've returned to a system in which birth and wealth determine one's position in life, in which political power is simply another commodity to be bought and sold. Every billionaire cabinet appointment, every record-shattering inauguration hall is another nail in democracy's coffin. The remedies are not mysterious. Constitutional amendments to overturn Citizens United, wealth taxes to prevent dynastic accumulation of obscene fortunes, public financing of elections, aggressive antitrust enforcement, progressive taxation to fund genuine opportunity. These are moderate correctives to a system that has careened toward oligarchy. But implementing them requires confronting an uncomfortable truth. We are no longer governed by our consent. We are governed by the consent of those who can afford to purchase governance. That hospital orderly has one vote. So does the billionaire who owns her hospital chain. But only one of them can donate $1 million to an inaugural committee and receive a phone call from the president. Only one of them gets a say in who runs the regulatory agencies. Only one of them can afford lobbyists to write the legislation that governs healthcare policy. The diabetic rationing his insulin, his voice doesn't matter. The grandmother choosing between medication and heating, she's irrelevant to the political class. They will die quietly, their deaths noted only by their families, while the men whose greed killed them accept awards at charity galas and give interviews about their philanthropy. The death of American democracy, if it comes, will arrive not with tanks in the streets, but with billionaires on the dais, smiling as they sign the checks. It will arrive while Americans wait in food bank lines and ration their medication and watch their communities hollowed out by corporate consolidation. It will arrive while we're told that this is freedom, that this is prosperity, that this is the natural reward for hard work and talent. The cruelty is the point, the indifference is the system, and until we develop the collective courage to name this arrangement for what it is, oligarchy, plutocracy, a betrayal of every principle upon which this nation was ostensibly founded, we will continue to watch as the wealthiest among us consolidate their grip on power, while children go hungry and the sick die for want of affordable medicine. This is not America's future. This is America's present, and it should fill every one of us with a rage that demands action.